I suppose it's worth picking a bit of background on me, first of all. Primarily, I'm a market researcher. I spent 27, 30 years doing market research. The last 10 years, though, I've been doing what I think people have come to describe as marketing research, which is basically doing research to help people market more effectively. That might be in any way you choose to go. The question I got involved in was with personas. Why? I think I suddenly found in personas that they were probably the most powerful research activity we could bring to companies. But at the same time, they probably became the most frustrating thing I'd ever done, because we kept doing the darn things and then they disappeared into this lovely worthy hole, but then nobody used them because they couldn't work out what to do with them, which was kind of frustrating. So I ended up talking to Bob. Two reasons, really. I got out of working full-time last year, but unfortunately my wife found out about this and has since had me doing massive penance in the garden. So unless I find something constructive to do, I'm going to die a very early death. So the real reason for this is, I suppose, it goes through a bit of levels, and I hope there's a kind of story in here. But first of all, I'm going to try to recap what personas are, not to patronise you, but to hopefully put us on the same page so we kind of know where we are. So what are they? They basically are things that represent a group of people that have common behavioural patterns. Now, the reason I like it is that I did economics by background. It was a great subject. I drank a lot of beer. I played a lot of rugby. I really enjoyed it. But I suddenly discovered it was really a crock of shit. It didn't work. So I'm sorry about the language, by the way, but hey. But what I did discover in going through this was something called behavioural economics. And for those of you who haven't done it, it is fantastically interesting to read because it focuses on what the needs of people are rather than assuming what they know. And I suddenly thought, that makes good sense, so let's go down that route. But what they are is basically they are collected from interviews, analysis, any way you can get data together. But it doesn't necessarily have to be original research to get the data. You will hold a lot of that intelligence within your organisation, but my guess is you're probably not as good as you could be at bringing that information together to help you create what you need, because departments don't necessarily talk to each other terribly well. I echo what Bob says about customer knowledge and customer insight. I also echo what he says about helping to create good salespeople. But I think the bit that I have always appreciated with great salespeople is you don't actually know you've been sold to, because the salesperson is so good at asking questions, they suddenly identify what you need and then they have a solution for you. But what a lot of salespeople have a huge amount of difficulty doing is asking the questions to get to the point that you understand the need. They normally go, hi, how are you? Would you like to buy my product? Oh, okay, that worked well. So it's the salespeople that can do the questions. But the final point is we actually try to get the personas to represent your audience. So it's based on audience understanding and needs. And it looks at the behaviours, the needs, the outlooks. And chatting to someone earlier, please don't think once you've done one persona, you've done the job. There will be different personas by geography, different personas by product, and don't think one persona fits all. It's an ongoing journey that you use them for, but once you get used to using them, it will help you enormously. Why do I think they're more relevant? It's partly to do with the demise of what I would call push marketing, as in shoving stuff out there, emails and the rest of it. And I think we've increasingly become less receptive to those things because there's so much of it going out there. We like to feel we're in charge of the decision. We like to feel that we can make contact. We like to feel that we made the informed decision about when to buy. So I think demand pull is actually more and more important. I have a slightly different representation on the funnel. I completely agree with the conclusion that the funnel is dead. I think it is. My conclusion was based from original research, though, because we actually saw the whole process happening in a seamless fashion and people actually having made almost 80% of the decision before they ever make contact with you. So to think they're moving through a funnel in a sequential fashion just doesn't work anymore. That decision is made behind the firewalls and the information they can look at and the downloads, and then they come to you then. So it's very important that you think of it in terms of every touch point you've got works for you. And the research we did actually seemed to show that people used the same type of marketing information at every point in the decision-making process. They would use white papers, they would use case studies, but there was not a linear pattern the way they used them. So think about what you produce based on personas, that it doesn't matter where in the funnel the people were. I do think demographics are dead. Traditional ones. We talk about older people not using online, digital, they do. I use it, we all use it for different reasons, but I think it's good to accept that conventional aspects about what different people do according to age and gender, it's gone. People do work now by behaviour, and if you think about the way that messaging has gone in consumer messaging, it is all driven through behaviours and understanding a need and messaging around the herd instinct or the fear instinct or whatever it might be. And I think actually being able to do that will help you message more effectively as time goes on. Personas can change thinking. If you embrace them and you work with them in your organisation, they can change what you do. I worked with Toyota in Brussels. They actually have personas in their foyer when you walk through it. And I think they've got 10 or 13 personas that cover their entire product range that they show to everybody. And their marketing just works around it. They're pretty good at what they do. So what do we do? And this is how they help. It focuses on the needs. We actually look at this. And I think the other way of looking at this is the need helps you understand what solution that person is actually going to want. So it moves away from the features and the functions that people tend to push. Critical of tech companies. Most tech companies, how many people are in tech here, by the way? Oh, shit, I'm going now. Most of the tech companies I've worked with tend to work on product or function or feature, quite unashamedly. You have to generate reasons for them to buy new, it's what you do, and it's a very, very successful model. I think the most successful companies I've worked with, however, actually think what the solution is that their product can fix and what people want from it. And if you can do that and move away, you end up with a much better point. The relative need by group. I think this is basically trying to understand a hierarchy of needs. And if you think, going back to the good old times of Maslow, there is a hierarchy of needs that applies to businesses as well. And if you can identify what that hierarchy of needs is, it works very well. Example. Most of the tech companies I work with shied away from what we used to call integration. I think integration became interoperability. But most people think that's done and dusted. Majority of customer work I've done always worries about how easy it's going to be to integrate a solution with what exists. So you, as a group, it's important to understand the need might be around integration or interoperability. And if you don't understand that hierarchy, you can push on all the wrong kind of things to actually get there. Understand how it works and develop strategies accordingly that actually work from there. The bit there that I've talked about is that customer journey maps, personas can help customer journey maps. What I would say is, though, don't try to do the things all together. If you try to do it, it becomes a bit like boiling the ocean. You can't do it. Try to do things in sequential patterns. Work out your personas, think about your needs, think about how that relates to a customer journey, and think what people might want at different stages of the customer journey based on what you know their needs are going to be at that point in time. Okay, this is a little bit of a how to do it, and I'm going to take you through how you would do it in an empirical way, first of all, which is where personas came from. They are a science-based thing. They're not something that we made up. They are based on science. And we used to use, well, we still use this thing called multivariate analysis. I have no idea how to do it, but I have a series of very clever people that do this kind of thing. They've usually got degrees in econometrics and things that I don't know how to spell, but they can do it. Multivariate analysis is a form of regression analysis. What it does is actually sits over the top of a data set, and it actually picks out patterns that are similarities by group. And it actually manages to find correlations of similarities, and it sorts them into groups as you actually go through. So it can see patterns that we can't see. There's an awful lot of talk of artificial intelligence at the moment. I think it is genuinely where the world is going to. But at the outer edge of artificial intelligence is basically regression analysis. When you get to the heart and the black box stuff, it's multiple regression analysis, IBM Watson. But this is basically a form of very simplistic artificial intelligence because it learns, it observes, and it moves forward. And it's enormously powerful. So that's the good bit. This is where it actually goes to. And I think the reason I'm showing this is that this is the process that we would go through using multivariate analysis to actually get to a persona. So the first point to remember is you don't know how many groups or clusters there are going to be when you start the research. And if you start by saying, I want to have 4 or 5 groups to work with, which is probably a good number from a marketing point of view, you run the risk of actually truncating it to such an extent, you miss the complexity and the variety. So I would always encourage people not to go in with a predefined number. Let it flow, let it come out, and then consolidate. The second point is you should actually think about what the focus of the research is, what you want it to do. A lot of times we've done research that people say, I just want personas. But what do you want the persona to tell you? How do you want to be able to use it? Who needs to use it? Where's your data going to come from? Make sure you actually have a really clear understanding. Best example I had about this, was doing some work with a guy that headed up Google Analytics, and he said the biggest challenge they have at the moment is people going to them and saying, look, we've got all this data, you've got all this data, what should I do with my business to make something better? And the guy from Google Analytics said, excuse me, but that's just wrong. You need to tell me what you want to do and I can help solve your problems. And I think the challenge we see at the moment is in people not being able to articulate the question that they want to answer before they start. So please really make sure you know what the question is you want to answer before you do personas. They're not an end in themselves. Touched earlier about the homogeneity of the characteristics. So again, it's defined by the homogeneity of each of the groups that you have together. They act and think and have similar needs, and you group them together. That's what you need to do. And finally, this is where historically art met science. We would actually look at the characteristics and try to give them a name that described what that person did. And we were usually cheesy, and we used it alliteration, and it was Fiona from finance and Peter from procurement and all the rest of it. And I think basically we did ourselves a massive disservice because we dumbed them down. This is how a traditional piece of persona analysis would look. This is some work we did for a fairly big insurance company that was trying to actually look to see how they could actually better sell pension products to people in the thing. What you see down this side is a list of the things that people might want. We call these attributes or needs or objectives for people contacting. And across the top, you can see it's actually put them into clusters. YOLO, I think that was, I can't remember what it was now, informed risk takers, financial warriors, apathetic savers. So we came up with 6 main groups. There are actually 15 groups that the computer chucked out. So we binned a whole load before we started because you can't work with them. We then looked at those and we actually binned 2 more because we said basically there are 2 here that are not going to work. Apathetic savers and short-term, whatever that might be, savers as well. They are not going to save whatever you do. Park them, don't try and message to them, focus on those people that hold opportunity. It's hard because we actually lost 25% of the market, but in the end, it's better to do that and focus on what you think you can do. You then actually build what we call a pen portrait, which helps us give a detailed understanding of what that person looks like. Demographics and the rest of it. We had quite an interesting conversation recently about whether the age of the group mattered. I didn't think it did. The challenge was a good one in that age matters because it actually talks about the way they might choose to connect through the media. I think I'd probably flip this on its head now and say try to use an understanding of their media consumption habits and make that a part of what you do so you know how best to message those people rather than thinking about their age. So depending on their media consumption habits, you can message accordingly in line with needs. But there you can see down there what the key characteristics of the group were because you can then actually build on those. So the previous slide, if this goes back, actually details every detail you've got there. But what we're then doing is some of the bits on the right that give you colour that actually goes through from there. Right, that works brilliantly. It's dead easy because computers generate it for you. You go, thank you, and then you rock on with it. Doesn't work terribly well in B2B for a couple of reasons. It's much harder getting the numbers done in B2B because it's expensive and it doesn't always work. So we said, okay, let's try and come up with a different approach. And this has been work in progress and there's been some quite good challenges on it, but I think it's getting to a better place. So I think you should follow the same principles that we see when you do proper quant personas. But don't assume the groups you see there, don't have the specific numbers. But the point there about the customer knowledge that Bob talked about is you really do need people that have knowledge of your customers when you bring them together in a group. Salespeople, yes. Marketing people, yes. I would say customer support people because they actually know what the number of queries are and why people get in touch and what the challenges are, so I think it's important to have those as well. Operational people I would have there, possibly commercial people, but bring a group together that represents all the facets of your organisation so you get as many different views on the customer as you can. I would also encourage people to try to scrape all the analysis you've got on customer touch points that you can bring together before you do the persona workshop. So bring that data together, maybe use it at the workshop, but make sure you've got the people and the data there, and don't necessarily do original research that is the questionnaire with people to actually do it. Try to use the knowledge you've got internally. And it might not be perfect, but you'll get a long way through it much quicker, and it's infinitely cheaper. The other thing I think you then need to do is once you go through it, you need to construct the personas by actual audience group, so you get to the same endpoint, but you need to make sure you're very clear about where you actually want to get to. I have a real problem with stereotypes. Sorry, I think clusterfuck is a recognised expression. I Googled it. The only thing I would say is don't Google images around it, because some of the things that came up, and it was a bad moment, that, and I'm probably, my laptop is being sanitised as we speak, but hey-ho. The reason I use that expression is stereotypes tell you what you think you know. If you go Frank from finance, everybody goes, he's going to be interested in saving money, he's going to be interested in seeing proof of ROI. Don't do that. Frank from finance might be in a startup that's really interested in proving to the VCs that that's where he's going to. He might be interested in actually growing the business. Don't assume that just because somebody performs a job role or has a job title, they act in one way. They absolutely don't, and it really holds you back if you use stereotypes. My clusterfuck is the other end. If you end up with so many possible personas, you cannot use them. Most companies I've ever worked with would probably try to work with 5 persona groups, because you can get your head around them, you can develop messaging strategies that work, and I would honestly bin the rest and just focus on the 5. Radical, drastic, but I think it works better. People struggle because they want to know, tell me what I should do and what the message should be. It doesn't work that way. It's shades of grey, not 50, it's shades of grey, because they are not absolutes. You're looking at relative differences between the different groups. And it's understanding those relative differences that gives you the colour and gives you something very powerful. It equally makes it hard to use for outbound, because the question with outbound is, which group should I send this message to? The answer is, it's probably not going to be that easy, because you can see inferences from all that across all the different groups you work for. But try to make sure that you configure your website, your messaging, so the different groups, based on the needs they've got, can engage with you from what they've actually got, and they come to you through the funnel that might be an imaginary funnel, and it doesn't happen sequentially, but it gets them there because they can get the right bits. We can now do B2B research much more cost effectively than we used to, because the online panels that people get paid to do research for are actually much more accessible. I still think if you're going to do quantified research, you probably need a minimum of 400 completed interviews just for the multivariate analysis to work. That doesn't make it unaffordable, but I would honestly encourage you to try to do it through a qualitative discussion process with a work group together before you go quant. And the other point, I think, is that so many times the personas become an end in themselves. I think it's the wrong way around. I think the persona should serve the marketing that you're trying to do and actually get to where you want to be. So, bring together a group of people that all understand your customers and work there. I've alluded to why you should use an external facilitator, because I need to get out of my garden, so that's a very important thing to take away from here. But on a more serious note, if you use an external facilitator, people take it seriously. If you just try to run it as an internal group, it will be people cutting in, cutting out, using their laptops. Use an external facilitator to make sure that it gets the attention it needs, and be prepared to really get out of your boxes. If you stay with what you think you know and you're not prepared to be challenged, you will get everything that you always thought. And I think it's a case of somebody I was working with once talked about orthodoxies. Orthodoxies relate to the way we think and the way we want to do something. It's completely the wrong way. The whole concept these days and where businesses are successful is when businesses are agile and change and amend the little things they do to react to what the customers need. So don't go in, and if you come up with something, go, we can't do that, that won't work, it won't work, so we need bigger batch numbers, forget it. You have to think what the customer needs and understand where it goes to, so you actually make very sure that you use that objectivity that can come externally. I've unashamedly dissed stereotypes. Don't use them. I would do anything I could to move away from job titles. the lowest minimum I would do would be a job role or a job function. Who's performing that job role or job function? But I would probably go up a level and I would try to actually look and see, I would define it by the needs of that group. So if it's I want to grow the business, what is it about it? It's growing Gordon. It's if you want to do something else, think about what the needs of that group are rather than the job title or the job role. Then systematically, list out all the reasons that people would contact you. The reason I say that is that I think the reasons people contact you are probably a really great way of understanding what people's needs are. They come to you to fix something or to understand something or to fix the problem. If you can list that out longhand or either talk to the people that can give you that insight, you will start to be able to build a list of things that go there. That bit there, avoid drinking your own Kool-Aid. There's nothing worse than people starting to believe their own marketing hype. It's the worst thing to do. Really, really forget the marketing, can I say it? Marketing bollocks. Don't accept the marketing bollocks and get back to why people really contact you, what the actual needs are, and focus on putting those down so it becomes truly customer-centric. Then think about the roles and the functions of people that you've actually got. So you start to bring those out. And what I would suggest people do, and this is what we try to do in the workshops at the moment, is create a matrix where down one side you've got all the things that people contact you for, the needs, the importance, and then across the top you put what the job roles or what those needs might be, and start to develop a hierarchy and priority by developing that matrix so you can see where you actually go to. It takes a bit of time, probably allow a good morning to actually go through it and do it, but it's a very effective way of making you focus on where it needs to go to from there. Then, once you've got that at an overall level, so this is the key group of needs that people come to me to address, and this is what they actually need on an individual basis and how they vary by group. But then I'd actually look to develop the pen portraits, like the one we saw about Financial Fiona, to actually understand what their ambitions and drivers are. People's ambitions are just as important as the reason they contact you. If somebody wants to change job, that will be a reason for doing something. If somebody wants to progress to the next career, somebody wants to transition, somebody wants to move the company to a different point, they are reasons why people contact you. So go beyond the immediate business need that they have in terms of coming to you. Lastly, agree on the key groups. You need collectively to agree those, so you map them out. As I said, Toyota have got 13. What I would then do is actually share those personas to the wider group in your company to get some feedback from what other people think. Sanity check them, see if they resonate, and go from there. If they do, hey ho, you can move forward. If they don't, be prepared to tweak them and amend them and change them, because they should absolutely become pivotal to everything you do. And if you don't get buy-in from everybody, it's just not going to be a terribly successful gig. I'm not a particular expert on message development, that's not what I do. But I think if you can get to a point that you can understand what the needs of those groups are, the next stage is actually developing a messaging strategy that will resonate with people who have that particular need. I think that's a fairly sequential step to get to that point, but it's based on some insight as to what the message should be. And at the same time, I would actually then try to make sure that that aligns with the way they can actually consume the media. So different people choose to absorb information in different ways. It's really interesting. If you look at IT decision makers in senior organisations, we did some work once, and it was really quite fascinating that 50% of the IT decision makers lived and died on kind of social online media. The other 50% didn't touch it with a barge pole. It was real Marmite. So don't just think that you're actually going to get a message and then push it out one way. You've got to find different ways of bringing that message together to actually get somewhere as well. I think my next stage would be is I would then bring it back to my website. And I discovered this fairly recently, that this concept of pillar pages, if you can then say, right, okay, let me use those personas and the needs that they show me to develop a pillar page, but then actually identify what you need to get around that pillar page to give you lots of different entry points to actually get that person to where you need to be. It sounds simple, but it's quite a big mapping out exercise to actually go and do it. But in terms of process, this works. Once you actually got that, you can then review the amount of content that you've actually got. You can do a content analysis to see where your gaps are. You can generate content for it, or even reposition the stuff you've got to actually make it work. And then finally, what I would do would be to actually align it with inbound, so you maximise the SEO based on what the needs of people are actually to come with you. But I think the key thing is try to remember where you want to be and where you want to get before you start using the personas, because they really are just part of the journey to actually get to where you want to be. I think that was about all. Oh no, sorry, I have to ask these questions. Right, I didn't do these, okay, so don't shoot me. These are I'm going to show you 3 separate persona groups that I need to show you fairly quickly that B2B ML have put together based on there. So the first person we have is Marketing Mary. The second person we have got is Director Dan, and you'll notice they've used alliteration, but we will discuss that later. So we've got Marketing Mary, Director Dan, and you have different things: revenue, ROI, productivity, and the last one we've actually got is Founder Frank. Okay. Can I just ask quickly, which one of those of you, and this is not gender specific, I'm sorry, who would be Marketing Mary? Hands up. Okay. Who would be Director Dan? Okay. And who would be Founder Frank? Okay. Who doesn't identify with anybody there? Great. What are you then? But that's interesting because the point there is that persona has failed to represent you, or it's failed to actually describe you. And I think that's the key thing. When you actually generate those personas, they should be broad enough that they capture all of the target audience that actually comes through from there. And possibly what we've done is actually constrain the thinking too much to try to get to where we think the marketing focus should be. That was my illustration. I think that really is all I had to say. It is, yes. I say thank you now.